Greetings, my peeps, and welcome to a new episode of my blog. And today is a really exciting one. We will be doing the history of South African beer, according to me. And yeah, so obviously something I'm very passionate about is beer history. And yeah, if I think about beer is very much about the experience, even as much as the taste. So when we go and look at experiences through your life and beer history, it kind of goes hand in hand. I think you can have the best tasting beer in the world, but if you don't have any experiences associated with it, it won't be any good. So I'm going to take you on a little journey through beer history of South Africa, according to me. So just to start off, the first brewery in the world was in Newlands, just up the road from me here, and started by a guy called Anders Olsen, and it was called the Olsen's Brewery. And his first beers he made there were called Olsen's Lager and Lion Lager. So today you still get Lion Lager. And my earliest memory drinking beer, so we're talking about 1881 here. My earliest memory drinking beer would be maybe at about 10 years old in South Africa, as young children were allowed to drink, sips of our father's beers. And he always drank Olsen's. And Olsen's was an incredible beer. It was bitter, it was crisp. He loved it for the bitterness. And I think Olsen's as a brand, so in 1881, he started Olsen's at the Newlands Spring, probably because of the Newlands Spring water, the same water I use in my beer today. And then they got bought out by, or let's go forward a little bit, 1893, Charles Glass started Castle Brewery, and then soon after that they bought out Olsen's Brewery. So the first beers were Olsen's and Lion. The next beer was Castle, and everyone's familiar with Castle. Castle exists everywhere today. I guess the only difference between the beer you would have tasted back then and the beer today is that these days they do put a bit of maize sugar in there, or dextrose. You've seen when I make beer I also put a bit of dextrose in there because I like a lighter beer. So say if you have a 4% alcohol beer and you put a bit of dextrose in the brew, then you're going to get a lot less sugar in your beer. So it's less heavy and less fattening. But I guess back in those days they would have stuck to a very pure Reinheitsgebot type of method of making beer. And yeah, so this is one of the very first beers. I don't know how close the recipe is now. I think when Charles Glass took over Olsen's, gradually they phased out the Olsen's beer. I think somewhere probably in around 1990, and they phased out Lion as well. Who knows why they did that? I mean, it'd be quite interesting to figure out. And they brought Lion back recently, say about 6 years ago. So I've been drinking Lion. It's my favorite kind of day-to-day lager beer. And I mean, something about Lion Lager, it's light, it's 4% alcohol. It's got a really crisp, very, very light flavor. It almost feels like there's no specialty malts in there. You know me, I'm not a big fan of over malted beers. But yeah, that is the start of beer in South Africa. And then after Charles Glass bought Olsen's Brewery, they started South African breweries, and that became one of the biggest breweries in the world, later to kind of take on the world. But I'm talking about South Africa though. So let's carry on the South African journey. And the next beer that was interesting, and I couldn't actually get one today, unfortunately, is Mitchell's Brewery. So in South Africa, the next major big thing that happened, besides the big conglomerates of SAB Miller, was Mitchell's Brewery. And it was started by a guy called Lex Mitchell in Knysna around about 1983. And what his goal was to make a beer which was completely fresh, original, and had different styles to it. So the first time I had Mitchell's Brewery, I remember I was working at Ferryman's Tavern, which is a tavern in the waterfront, and it's also next door to Mitchell's Brewery. and my manager at the time used to skill us up on beer because we had 12 beers on tap. We had Guinness, Becks, everything. The only like really different beer we had was the Mitchell's Bosun's Bitter and the Mitchell's Lager. And the Bosun's Bitter was the first South African beer I tasted that was an ale, and it was fantastic. So it's still going today. Changed hands a number of times. But I can remember having that first Mitchell's Bosun's Bitter, and I thought, this is kind of weird. Like the flavor is unusual, but I kind of liked it. I kind of wanted a little bit more of that weird bitter flavor. And I guess so the theme is bitterness. My whole life I have been attracted to these bitterer beers. And yeah, so that was a great beer. Ooh. Fast forward a little bit further to Cape Town when a chap called Chris Barnard had been traveling around Europe, and he decided like we really didn't have a lot of what he was really interested in, which was like these craft beers. So Mitchell's kind of grew to a microbrewery, but Chris Barnard wanted to actually sell lagers and stuff, and he only had a 100-liter kit. And I remember, like, I think I've even dealt with them in the past. And I remember he was running it under his father's bag and hat company in Woodstock or something, but he was selling kegs to a couple of the biker pubs, and his lager was probably the first one I tasted, and I thought, this is incredible, because this was probably like one of the first lagers I had. Ferryman's lager, I mean the Forester's lager, the Mitchell's one, it had a bit of funk. So because it was like a real traditional English ale, it had a bit of funk, so it was a bit weird to drink it. I mean, I never knew then that that's just how real beer tastes sometimes, especially when it's a lager. It's got a bit of that sulfur and that funk. So Boston was the first lager that I tasted where it was like, wow, this is better than any of the SAB beers. And then they made a Johnny Gold Weiss beer. And Johnny Gold Weiss beer was the first Weiss beer in South Africa to be made in South Africa, according to me. And it was just incredible. I remember the first time I bought 24 Johnny Gold Weiss beers. It was like an investment. Let's see how the Boston still holds up. That is it. That is stunning. No, it is. It's kind of similar to how I remember it. Maybe it's a little bit crisper, but yeah, one of the very first craft beers that came around in that era. And I think these guys, Mitchell's was always around. Everyone knew Mitchell's, but it was kind of for the weird people who like were real beer pundits and wanted to go out of their way to find something interesting. But when Chris came onto the scene, started selling Boston, that started to become popular. Then the Weiss beer broke on, and the Weiss beer really changed people's perception. They were like, okay, this is an unbelievable beer, but where can we get it? And it wasn't in a lot of places, and I think the craft beer scene around the world started blowing up at that time, and that was around, I think you could say around 2000. That's when he started the brewery. Ooh. That's fantastic. Nice bitterness, nothing, absolutely no faults. Then fast forward about 5 years after that, craft beer scene really starts kicking off in South Africa, and three dudes from Cape Town created this brand and Union, Brewers and Union. And yeah, they don't say a lot about what the origin story was or what it was, but basically they'd been traveling around Europe a lot. They'd been tasting the European styles, and they just saw the gap in South Africa for that. And I think they quickly abandoned the South African market, and then they pushed their brand overseas. And now they're kind of making a trip back. So this is one of the ones I first tasted. This is the Brewer and Union wheat beer. I used to drink this Weiss beer a lot. I used to drink their Helles lager a lot. And it was just a treat. You'd buy these big bottles. They would have the same size bottle as these, the dumpies, not these small, pathetic cans. And you'd get a Helles lager, and it was just a treat. And likewise with the Weiss. Although after a while, I remember after tasting a lot of Vices in America, this one started to become very banana-y for me. So let's give it a little taste, see how they've weathered the many years since they came out, maybe in around, I think 2000 and, I don't know, it's hard to say. Yo, it's got some nice nose. Quality, no. Still very quality. It's got quite a little bit of estery, kind of sweety maltiness alcohol in there. It's a 5%. Yeah, very similar to how I remember it, actually. A lot of banana. And these guys really kicked off the craft beer scene in South Africa. From them, I think the floodgates opened and you started getting literally 100 small craft breweries starting up. Some big names ended up coming up, like Devil's Peak getting bought out in the end by big corporate. Yeah, so many craft breweries open, too many to mention. And kind of takes us up to the present day, where you've got a lot of craft breweries. Some of them survive, some of them don't survive. And the latest Africa Beer Cup winner, I thought I'd just add this in as the future of beer in South Africa. Who knows where it's going to go? So this is Jump Brewing and Saggy Stone Brewing. And they did a double dry hopped West Coast Guru IPO, 56 IBUs, pine resin, citrus dankness. I mean, I love this package. Soul renewing beer brewing. I mean, it's crazy. So, I mean, I think, yeah, even though you're going to pay like up to $40 for one of these small, tiny, weeny little cans, I think it is becoming, it's becoming something where people drink less. They don't drink quantity, they prefer quality. So let's see if this is any good. Big fan of Shackleton. Oh, Saggy Stone, sorry, big fan of Saggy Stone. Yeah, I mean, it's mainly just bitterness and alcohol. Not gonna lie, like that's not something I would order a lot. Bitterness, alcohol, a little bit over malty. Yeah, not really my style of beer. But anyway, the best beer is the beer in your glass. And the most important thing about beer is having a memory associated with the beer. But anyway, gonna put that one in the fridge for later when I can't taste so well anymore and get back on these guys. Cheers.